Hi everyone, welcome to our reptile behavior and reproduction video. By the end of this video, you'll be able to explain the function of the amniotic egg and the parts of it, describe the unique characteristics of reptile mating and reproduction, differentiate vivipary and ovipary, explain parthenogenesis and why it's sometimes exhibited in reptiles, discuss the process of incubation, hatching, parental care, and development in reptiles. So starting with the amniotic egg, this is a big kind of leap forward in evolution where it really allows for more terrestrial life. We're not reliant on aquatic environments anymore for the egg development, and the young can more fully develop inside the egg. So the embryonic egg has these different extra embryonic membranes. The allantois is for waste disposal. The chorion allows for gas exchange, so oxygen coming in, carbon dioxide going out. The amnion is a fluid-filled sac for protection. Think about even in mammals, there's amniotic fluid inside the placenta, so it's that cushion. And then the yolk sac is nutrition for the developing embryo. So as the embryo gets bigger, the yolk sac gets smaller, the allantois gets bigger because there's more waste. So it changes, each of the membranes gets smaller or bigger depending through development. Oh, and for most reptiles, the outer shell is leathery, kind of like soft and leathery, but crocodilians, it's harder, more calcified. Timing of reproduction depends on temperature. So since reptiles are ectothermic and most are poikilothermic, there has to be some minimum threshold of temperature before they're able to reproduce. Photoperiod plays a smaller role. Temperature is really the most important thing. Typically, reptiles will breed about 4 to 8 weeks, so a month or two after coming out of brumation. Now, brumation is kind of analogous to hibernation in mammals. It's when in the winter, when reptiles kind of decrease all their body functions to deal with that much lower temperature. Most reptiles have just one clutch of eggs per year. Mate selection happens in a couple different ways. Smell is a big one, or kind of chemoreception. So some species secrete and perceive pheromone signals from other members of their species. So usually it's males sending out that scent or pheromone to attract females. A good example is the musk turtle. We've talked before about those being termed the stink pot. Visual displays also come into play with reptiles. One example is the green anole. They have this nice pink beard looking thing called a dewlap, and that they'll just puff out and it'll just be bright pink when they're mating or when they're trying to mate, trying to attract a mate. There are some turtles, other species of reptiles, that will bob their head as a mating display, and some will use a combination of smell and sight cues. In reptiles, oftentimes what happens is there's multiple mating. So a female will mate with multiple males and have sperm from multiple males inside her body to fertilize the eggs before they're laid. And sometimes what happens is in that clutch of eggs, there's some eggs fertilized by one male, some fertilized by another, might be multiple dads for one clutch of eggs. Other times, and in some species, this happens more. The female can choose which sperm is going to fertilize the eggs, and there's some species that can discern when the sperm comes from an individual that's closely related genetically to the female. In decreasing inbreeding helps with overall fitness of a species, and so you can see the adaptive advantage of that. So that's a pretty neat adaptation. Reptiles exhibit both ovipary and vivipary. So species are one or the other. There are some species that lay eggs, some that give live birth. Now, laying eggs, we call that oviparous or ovipary. Live birth in general is called vivipary or vivipary, but specifically in reptiles, we call it ovovivipary or ovoviviparous because it's not that they are placental and the young are developing inside the body and placenta. They're still inside what is an amniotic egg inside the female's body. That outer shell isn't leathery or it isn't hard, but there's still a membrane. There's still all the extra embryonic membranes of an amniotic egg. So it's like they're developing in an egg, but inside the mother's body. And then they kind of bust out of that membrane when they are birthed in live birth. The members of Viperidae, so the pit vipers are viviparous, some skinks are viviparous, and then members of the genus Thamnophis, so our garter snakes, ribbon snakes, those give live birth. Some reptiles are capable of parthenogenesis. Parthenogenesis is an asexual reproduction approach where a new individual develops from an unfertilized egg. So a female can give birth without ever coming into contact with a male. There are some species of lizards where the whole population is female. In those, we see this obviously, in order for the population to go on, the females are reproducing through parthenogenesis. There are also some accounts of what we call facultative parthenogenesis. When no mate is available, there have been accounts of garter snakes and timber rattlesnakes reproducing when a female has only been around other females or only been isolated by herself. So that facultative is when it's not what they always do. It's only when they're placed in the situation where there's no alternative, they can still reproduce. So many species retain their eggs inside their body until halfway through development, and some until they're almost hatched. So we talked about oviparous and viviparous. There's kind of a spectrum, right? So there's some species that hold on to the eggs internally most of the way so that they get them nice and developed and then lay the eggs. And you can understand if the female is carrying the eggs inside, they're protected. On the flip side, carrying several eggs inside a body makes that body heavy, harder to escape from predators. So there's trade-offs. Embryonic development of reptiles can take anywhere from 5 to 16 weeks for turtles, lizards, and snakes. The sex is determined by the incubation temperature in the middle third of incubation. You can find lots of research articles on this where in labs, researchers change the temperatures and try to get different sexes. And so it's been, for most species, the temperature needed for a male, temperature needed for a female has been determined. The incubation temperature can also have an effect on long-term survival, growth rate, behavior. So if it's too high or too low, it could have a negative effect on those vital rates. The caruncle, I love that word. It's this little, like an egg tooth, but in reptiles, it's not a tooth. It's a little extension of the epidermis, kind of one of those little like horn-like extensions of the epidermis that is found on baby reptiles in the egg. They use it to crack out of their egg, and then it's reabsorbed after birth. So many reptiles, especially lizards and snakes, care for their eggs, but very few care for their young. Turtles generally don't care for eggs or their young. So this is like when you think about sea turtles, they come on shore, they lay their eggs, they leave, and then the fate of the eggs and the young is up to the environment. Reptiles are completely developed though upon hatching, so they don't need to be fed by an adult. They don't need to develop before they can walk or before they can move, swim. So they're capable of feeding, moving, and defending themselves as soon as they hatch. Reptiles continue to grow through their life, and it's size, not age, that determines sexual maturity. So there's a certain size they have to get to, and at that point they'll be reproductively mature. And sometimes that depends on resources available, whether it takes a year, 2 years, 5 years. All right. Ask yourself, can you hit all of these bullets? You know about the amniotic egg, about mating and reproduction in reptiles, difference between vivipary and ovipary, what's parthenogenesis, process of incubation, hatching, parental care, development in reptiles. If you need to go back, do so. Otherwise, what do turtles use to call their mom? What do you think? A shell phone. See you in class.